We now move on to a contender for the weirdest country on planet Earth, Japan. On the 27th of September, Japan held a leadership election to determine a replacement prime minister, after the former PM, Fumio Kishida, resigned from his position. Now that a month has passed, the leading candidate has been determined to be Shigeru Ishiba, who will now take the position of acting prime minister representing the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP. The leadership shakeup isn't all that surprising, as former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has been caught up in a long list of scandals since taking office. This involved the assassination of Shinzo Abe and its ties to the controversial Unification Church, 2 reshuffles of his cabinet, and a slush fund corruption scandal within the LDP, which dropped his approval rating to just 17%. This series of fuck-ups would eventually lead to Kishida's voluntary resignation. As the LDP has remained in power all but 6 years since 1955, the new Prime Minister is almost certainly going to be whoever was chosen internally, with the 3 main candidates being Sanae Takaichi, Shinjiro Koizumi, and Shigeru Ishiba. Sanae Takaichi is a staunch conservative, holding strong nationalist views within the party, and would have been set to be Japan's first female Prime Minister. Our second candidate, Shinjiro Koizumi, served as Minister for the Environment between 2019 and 2021, and is the son of former Prime Minister Kotaro Koizumi. Unfortunately for him, in a country with such an enormous elderly population, being a 43-year-old candidate made it difficult for him to secure enough support. The third, and ultimately winning candidate, Shigeru Ishiba, has served as the Minister of Defense, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Forestry and Fisheries, and the Secretary-General of the LDP from 2012 to 2014. Ishiba has pledged a full exit from Japan's high inflation rate, and has discussed plans to support legislation allowing married women to keep their maiden names. This might sound a bit strange to a lot of the Western world, but this actually makes him fairly progressive in the context of Japanese politics. For example, his opponent Sanae Takaichi previously stated that she considers Margaret Thatcher a role model, so Shigeru Ishiba might as well be Bernie Sanders. Ishiba has also floated his intentions for reducing Japan's dependency on nuclear power in favor of more renewable resources. Japan is still uneasy about their nuclear energy after numerous incidents. Ishiba is known to be something of a maverick within his party, often speaking his mind quite publicly, and at one point he briefly left the party altogether before later returning. This kind of attitude has gained him a fair bit of popularity among Japanese voters, even if it's made him a number of enemies within the LDP. The most noteworthy of all his policies is Ishiba's desire for an Asian version of NATO, to combat the growing threat that China and North Korea present to the region. He argues that due to the relative decline of the United States on the world stage, it would be prudent for nations outside of the Chinese-Russia bubble to strengthen ties to solidify security within the region. He also believes that US-Japan military ties should also be strengthened, but that Japan should nevertheless become more self-reliant militarily. By the time this video goes live, the actual general election would have already taken place. So unless something insane happens, Shigeru Ishiba has remained Prime Minister, and we get to smugly keep our credibility. Tune in next month for an election people actually care about, because either way, that's gonna be an absolute shit show. Viewers will know that most of our stories are just covering man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. But for a change of pace, here's some natural horrors beyond our comprehension. At the end of September and the beginning of October, the nations in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the southeastern United States, were struck by 2 massive hurricanes. The first and most destructive was Hurricane Helene, a Category 5 hurricane that made landfall in the Florida Panhandle on the 26th of September. Helene would then make its way all the way to Virginia, tearing through 500 miles of the East Coast. As of time of writing, 26 people still remain unaccounted for, and the death toll sits at nearly 250 in the United States alone. This is the highest death toll of any storm in the mainland US since Hurricane Katrina. The second hurricane was given the most bitch-ass name the World Meteorological Organization could think of: Hurricane Milton. As Milton was traveling through the Gulf of Mexico, it gained enough energy to reach Category 5 status, and, according to all relevant meteorological agencies, became the most powerful late-season hurricane on record. Luckily for the state of Florida, the mighty Poseidon was fortunately just fucking with us, as Milton was downgraded to a Category 3 just before it hit land. Milton did unfortunately lead to 25 lives lost and thousands of people losing their homes. Although an absolute tragedy, the worst-case scenario was enough to seriously freak out veteran meteorologists, including John Morales, who broke down on air. Mr. Morales would later write an article in the New York Times where he would state, quote, "Hurricanes of the early 21st century are not like the ones of the 20th century. A greater proportion of tropical cyclones around the planet are reaching violently catastrophic category 4 and 5 intensity. It's not that there are more tropical storms overall, it's that more of the ones that form are going through rapid intensification cycles like we see with Hurricane Milton and Helene. Those types of mega hurricanes take more lives and wreck more livelihoods. As has now come tradition following a natural disaster in the United States, Helene and Milton were also the target of conspiracy theories. Most of these have targeted the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the branch of the government in charge of maintaining such a crisis. Greatest hits from these conspiracies include FEMA money being diverted to illegal immigrants, FEMA using the disaster to seize land, and FEMA enacting martial law to set up concentration camps to kick off a new world order. This shit got so bad that the press secretary of Florida's governor had to publicly state, "No one is trying to steal your home. Please, for the love of fuck, evacuate yourself from a biblical level storm." Paraphrasing. None of these are quite as funny as the Jewish space laser conspiracy during the 2018 California wildfires, but they're still a fun addition to our collection. Unfortunately, these conspiracies didn't just culminate with people on Twitter trying to fuse their two collective brain cells together like they would Dragon Ball Z characters. One man was actually arrested in North Carolina for threatening FEMA workers and faces the charge of going armed to the terror of the public. In an interview with a local radio station in North Carolina, FEMA director Deanne Criswell would address this recent spike in conspiracy theories with, quote, "I want people who have been impacted to register for assistance. What I don't want is somebody who is listening to lies and then not getting into our system to get the type of assistance they're eligible for and they deserve." While it is certainly true that FEMA has a long, well-documented history of not doing enough in disaster zones, we couldn't find any evidence that FEMA had been operating maliciously during this month's relief effort. Despite its not-so-stellar history, the agency seems to have done a decent job following October's hurricanes, distributing more than 15.4 million meals, 14.9 million liters of water, and as well as $722 million United States dollars in assistance to individuals and families. The worst-hit areas have been concentrated in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, and the total estimated damage currently sits at $300 billion USD. Quite fortunately, Florida avoided being sunk into the ocean entirely by Hurricane Milton, and the early stages of reconstruction are underway in the aftermath of Helene. The state of Florida will thankfully be around to grace us with "Local Florida Man" headlines for at least another hurricane season. It's kinda crazy to think about, but if Florida had actually been wiped off the map, historians many years from now would legitimately be using GTA 6 to study what life was actually like in the Sunshine State. A scary thought to be sure, but not nearly as scary as today's sponsor.
Viewers who want to be as free as a wayward spirit, or who just happen to have a few skeletons in their closet, might be interested in a VPN. And lucky for you, Surfshark VPN is the best you'll find in this earthly realm. As most gals and gargoyles will tell you, Surfshark isn't just handy for keeping your personal data away from prying eyes. Users will also be safe from ads from the beyond, trackers of the unknown, and the ever-terrifying malevolent malware. But fear not, dear traveler. With Surfshark's powerful spells and incantations, you'll be able to ward off such wicked spirits as your ever-present online guardian keeps your information safe. However, this sorcery doesn't stop at mere cloaking spells. Surfshark VPN can allow beings to appear anywhere in the world at the push of a button. This will leave travelers free to explore the darkest corners of the internet and unlock hidden wonders, defying the sinister forces that seek to confine your viewing pleasure. And to make a forbidden fruit even sweeter, by simply going to surfshark.com/surswag, or using this mysterious arcane cipher on screen, you'll be scoring 4 months without charge. But here is the enchanting twist. Viewers who are not 100% enthralled by their experience can back out anytime in the first 30 days, and Surfshark shall grant you a full refund. A promise bound in blood. Surfshark VPN, your online guardian for the spookiest of realms.
Meanwhile, singer Lily Allen says she makes more money selling feet pics than from Spotify streaming. Joe Biden assures voters that the US government doesn't control the weather, and Saudi Arabia is attempting to join the UN Human Rights Council. We've got quite a bit to cover in Ukraine this month, so let's just jump right in. Since the 20th of September, the Ukrainian military has continued its counteroffensive operations in the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. Slow but steady process has been made to capture the key town of Tokmak, which would then open up routes to more ambitious locations like Melitopol and Crimea. As the winter once again starts to approach, both Russia and Ukraine are set to face a significant strain on their own resources, and both sides are expected to start digging in over the colder months. In late September and throughout October, Ukraine increased its drone and missile strikes on Russian territory, particularly in Belgorod and Kursk. These strikes have disrupted key logistical hubs including railway lines and energy infrastructure. By targeting these critical assets, Ukraine is aiming to weaken Russia's ability to reinforce its troops in occupied Ukrainian territory. While Kiev has not officially claimed responsibility for all cross-border operations, it is widely believed that these strikes are part of Ukraine's broader strategy to divert Russian resources away from the front line. Outside of Ukraine, the 20th of October saw the Soviet state of Moldova hold a referendum to amend its constitution, enshrining its path towards European Union membership. Although previous opinion polls had expected the EU vote to win pretty easily, the vote ultimately passed on a razor-thin margin of just 50.03%. Although there is obviously quite a sizable portion of the population which is firmly against EU membership, the tight margin was attributed in large part to an influence campaign orchestrated by pro-Russian oligarch Ilan Shor. Shor had reportedly organized a far-reaching anti-EU propaganda campaign and used a $15 million sum from Russia to pay off over 100,000 Moldovan citizens. This plot to influence the referendum might just be the worst kept secret within Moldova. And when the BBC investigated these claims, they literally found a woman asking where she can claim her vote money. Imagine being a BBC reporter and thinking you were going to have to spend weeks doing grueling investigative journalism, and you just randomly see some woman outside a polling station like,
"The guy I'm really looking for, wink, is Mr. Bribe, wink, wink."
Moldova's vote to join the EU marks a significant blow for an expansionist Russia, as its border with Ukraine would basically make its own annexation a foregone conclusion should its neighbor lose the war. By being a member of the EU, an attack on one country would mean an attack on the entire Union, meaning Russia would need to have a death wish to even set foot within Moldova's borders. Even with this significant loss for Russia, it's clear that pro-Russian factions still maintain significant support within the country, and this division is unlikely to subside anytime soon. Speaking of Russian losses, one of Ukraine's newly acquired F-16 jets successfully shot down an Su-34 fighter bomber this month, representing Ukraine's first air-to-air kill with the aircraft. Only around 150 of the Su-34 have ever been built, and sanctions on the country have made such losses incredibly difficult to replace. On the diplomatic front, Turkey has continued to advocate for the return of Crimea to Ukraine. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan reiterated that Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014, must be restored to Ukrainian control under international law. Turkey itself has had an incredibly complicated relationship with both Russia and the EU, so they've been seen as something of a wild card when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Turkey is a longtime member of NATO, but at the same time, its relatively close relationship with Russia has made it a key mediator within the conflict. But we'll get back to Turkey a little later. In another strange square on 2024's bingo card, October has also seen North Korean soldiers confirmed to be alongside Russia within Ukraine. These fighters have reportedly been deployed to support Russian military units in non-combat roles such as logistics and rear support. However, whether these will remain strictly non-combat remains to be seen. This strategy has however come with some downsides, as a number of North Koreans have used the opportunity to defect once crossing into Ukrainian-controlled areas. South Korean officials have stated that it will likely re-evaluate its Ukrainian aid policy, should North Korea have a more active role in the war. Moving on to what sounds like the setup of a James Bond movie, early October saw a Russian S-70 Okhotnik B stealth drone malfunction over Ukrainian airspace. This was a pretty big deal, as there are supposedly only 6 of these prototypes in existence. Worrying that the drone could fall into the wrong hands, Russian forces would decide to shoot it out of the sky with what is believed to be an Su-75 fighter jet. The crash site was later targeted by a Russian Russian ballistic missile, but by then, local Ukrainian police had already recovered the wreckage. The monumental fuck-up could act as a serious setback for Russia's aerospace R&D, as NATO's top science nerds are likely analyzing every inch of the wreckage as we speak. The month of October saw the announcement of this year's Nobel Prize winners, with 6 prizes being awarded in the field of physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, literature, peace, and economic sciences. This part is admittedly a bit dry, so feel free to skip forward to our section on those goofy Tesla robots if you're not really into us going full academic mode. First was physics, awarded jointly to John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton, for foundational discoveries and inventions that enable machine learning with artificial neural networks. The 2 winners took fundamental equations from physics and applied them to a neural network system, enabling it to recognize patterns autonomously and pick them out of supplied data or images. This work, first conducted by the pair in the 1980s, served as the basis for the development of modern artificial intelligence. Without getting into a lesson in computer science and AI, effectively the 2's discoveries enabled the construction of computers that can remember what it was fed previously, but also recognize patterns and label something it has never seen before. There was some controversy with this decision, because at least at first glance, the discovery appears to be more related to mathematics and computer science rather than physics. The Nobel Committee commented that because the work has its foundations in molecular physics and the winners did not abandon their physics foundations throughout the research, the discoveries can be counted for the physics prize. Next up is chemistry, half awarded solely to David Baker for computational protein design, and the other half jointly awarded to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper for protein structure prediction. For a bit of context, proteins are large, highly complex molecules made out of a chain of amino acids. These chains can be made up of hundreds of thousands of acids, meaning the exact structure and orientation of a protein is exceptionally hard to figure out. Since 1962, chemists have used a method called X-ray crystallography to take pictures of proteins. Although it allows the overall structure to be seen directly, the entire process is a pain in the ass, which is why only 200,000 proteins have been analyzed using this method since its invention. Fast forward to the modern day, and Hassabis and Jumper developed an AI model called AlphaFold 2. This model was trained on protein structure mechanics, and when given a protein, it could predict its structure with an accuracy nearly the same as that of X-ray crystallography. Once they realized how insane their model had become, they then analyzed the entire human protein structure. Instead of humanity collectively analyzing 200,000 proteins in 60 years, these guys analyzed 200 million in just 3 years. Meanwhile, Baker's work focused on the issue of inventing entirely new proteins. Like the other 2, Baker originally developed a program to determine protein structure. Early on, however, he decided to flip the premise. Instead of inputting a finished protein and getting back an order of amino acids to use, the program can create entirely new proteins based on a list of desired properties, effectively eliminating the time sink of trial and error. Combining Baker's work with Hassabis and Jumper's means that the development and analysis of new proteins has become vastly easier, significantly lessening the burden for the discovery of anything from pharmaceuticals to biomechanics to nanoscale sensors. The third prize in physiology or medicine was awarded jointly to Victor Ambros and Gary Ruvkun for the discovery of microRNA and its role in post-transcriptional gene regulation. For a bit of context, there are hundreds of different types of cells in the human body. Each of them are highly specialized. All cells, with limited exceptions, also have identical DNA information. MicroRNA is a newly discovered genetic component in all multicellular organisms that dictates how cells control what genes are expressed, and by extension, how they know what to specialize in. Research into microRNA began on small worms, and it was found that changes to a gene called Lin4 resulted in an unusually short DNA molecule. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that the gene played a role in controlling what genes were expressed and which were restricted. The discovery was first published in 1993, but to their surprise, the wider scientific community didn't seem to give a shit. It took another 7 years before another paper was published, this time focused on animals, and this discovery attracted significant interest. Fast forward to today, and there are thousands of genes similar to Lin4 that are known to have a similar role. The discovery and action of these genes helps to explain how the body's cells know what to do and aided the development of large, complex organisms with highly specialized cells and organ systems. Next up we have literature, awarded to Hong Kong of South Korea for her intense poetic prose that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life. Born in 1970, Hung was first published at 23 with a series of poems, followed shortly after by a number of books which focus on the effect of authoritarianism and nonconformity on a person's life and psychology. Themes of relationships, family tension, public pressure, and historical difficulties feature prominently throughout Hung's history of work. As most of you degenerates can't read, we're going to move on from this one. The fifth award is in peace, awarded to Nihon Hidankyo, a Japanese anti-nuclear organization formed out of the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. Since these bombings, the use of nuclear weapons has come to be seen across the world as morally unacceptable. Nihon Hidankyo has contributed strongly to the development of this nuclear taboo through their educational efforts, memorials, and activism. Their advocacy for hibakusha, a term for atomic bomb survivors, has led to a greater acceptance of the survivors and a permanent preservation of their stories. One day there will be no more survivors of nuclear weapons, meaning it's extremely important to record their stories while we can. The Nobel Committee has expressed their desire to honor all survivors and their work, choosing to award the prize to Nihon Hidankyo as they are the largest of these organizations. Finally, we have economics, awarded jointly to Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson for studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. For context, the richest 20% of the world's countries have a GDP approximately 30 times higher than the poorest 20%, and the winners found an explanation for this. It is down to a country's institutions. In particular, they were able to show a correlation between a country's past history of colonization and how these colonial institutions were set up. The winners found that in general, the richer a country was before colonization, the poorer it ended up afterwards. They also found that the higher the mortality rate among colonizers, the poorer the country was left afterwards. The US was colonized heavily by the British, and the relatively liberal systems they set up were preserved after independence. Mexico, meanwhile, was colonized by the Spanish, who sent much fewer colonizers and established a more feudal system, which was also preserved upon Mexico's independence. Further proving the point, prior to colonization, the Aztec Empire, which ruled modern-day Mexico, was relatively wealthy compared to the surrounding native nations, including those in what is today the US. It's not all bad, however, as the winners noted that it is possible to break these historical institutions, which vastly improves a country's wealth and prosperity. The winners of each prize are entitled to 11 million Swedish krona, or about 1 million freedom bucks, which can be split up to 3 ways. We can only hope that this year's recipients have spent their prize money on something more interesting than their winning topics. October has been quite a busy month in the tech industry, so we decided to throw a bunch of stories into a single lightning round of coverage. First up, we have OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, the world's most incredible chatbot which still can't give you a straight answer for who would win between a knight and a samurai. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman would come before Congress at the tail end of September, campaigning for the opening of dedicated AI data centers across the United States. While data centers are hardly a novel concept, the head-turning aspect is the sheer energy such infrastructure could require, with OpenAI's internal report predicting that each data center could require a colossal 5 gigawatts of power to run. For context, the time machine invented in 1985 by eccentric scientist Dr. Brown, made famous by the documentary Back to the Future, required a mere 1.21 gigawatts of power. 5 gigawatts could power a city with over 3 million residents. And just as a reminder, the United States only has 2 cities with a population higher than 3 million, those being LA and New York. Nearly half of the countries on Earth don't have populations that high, which puts into perspective how insanely energy intensive these AI data centers are expected to become. As crazy as it sounds, the needs of these tech companies are actually doing wonders for the nuclear energy industry. Earlier in the year, Amazon paid $650 million for a data center powered by a 2.5 gigawatt nuclear power plant. Shortly after, Microsoft reached an agreement to once again spin up the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant to buy the plant's entire power output for the next 20 years. Some people put solar panels on their roof, others lease themselves a long-dormant nuclear plant. Analysts have estimated that Altman's data center could cost up to $100 billion, likely paid for by its new partner Microsoft, and that's if they can even find the land and power to go ahead with construction. Altman has said that he is prepared to make the investment, however, and considers it critical in cementing the US's lead in AI over China and other rivals. Also Also in the AI world, Google has decided that in order to power their AI machines, they also need to take the nuclear option. California-based Kairos Power received a permit to begin construction of a newly designed nuclear power plant, the first new design in the US in over 50 years. This type of plant uses molten fluoride salts instead of water to provide cooling, theoretically increasing efficiency and power output of the plant. The first plant is expected to come online by the end of the 2020s, with further capacity being installed throughout the 2030s. AI is a power-guzzling industry and threatens to torpedo companies' emission pledges, so many are turning to nuclear power for its significantly lower carbon emissions. As a positive side effect, however, the US has committed to triple its nuclear power capacity by 2050, and seems well on the way as a result of these tech industry investments. AI might end humanity in the long run, but it might force us to save ourselves in the short term. The reason that tech companies have invested such a ridiculous amount of money into AI is because it's believed that whoever can maintain the lead in the AI race will eventually hit a point where its own AI model will be able to infinitely improve upon itself, at a rate that will be impossible for other companies to compete. AI itself has the capacity to upend nearly every single industry on Earth, and that kind of ability is going to make the billions made by current tech companies look like absolute chump change. There is a reason that the median salary for OpenAI engineers is nearly $1 million a year, because no amount of investment wouldn't be worth winning the AI arms race. Next to make headlines was Elon Musk, who in his spare time from running Twitter into the ground, heads the electric car company Tesla. Around the start of the month, Tesla held a launch party called We Robot for its totally autonomous vehicle, a so-called robo-taxi. The vehicle, dubbed Cybercab, won't include either pedals or a steering wheel, but will instead entirely rely on the unsupervised self-driving system developed by Tesla. Design-wise, Musk seems to have taken inspiration from Pokemon, as the Cybercab looks like an evolution of the Cybertruck, in the same way Porygon evolves into Porygon 2. The Cybercab is planned to release sometime in 2026 or 2027, depending on how long it takes to finish developing the self-driving. Also featured at the party was a totally AI-controlled humanoid robot called Optimus, capable of interacting with attendees and reacting nearly instantly to both spoken conversations and physical cues. The robot was seen pouring beer at the bar, walking around and chatting with guests at the event. Tech YouTuber Marques Brownlee described the robot as, quote, either the single greatest robotics and large language model demo the world has ever seen, or it's mostly operated by a human. No in between. As it turns out, it was mostly operated by a human. Some of these tells were apparently obvious in person, namely that the robot could have different voices at different points throughout the event, and that the instant reaction seemed just a little too good to be true. To be fair, Tesla didn't seem to hide the fact that the robots weren't totally AI, with the robots themselves admitting that they were human-assisted when asked. Overall, the party was seen as a mixed bag, with some praising the company for showing an optimistic future where robo-taxis are on every corner and AI robots are in every home. Others weren't so convinced, as Mr. Musk himself has often made a habit of promising things that are either way too ambitious, or that he has no intention of actually doing. Musk previously said that Tesla would have 1 million robo-taxis on the road by 2020, and that Twitter would become a bastion of free speech. As of now, there are exactly 0 robo-taxis on the road, and we're currently editing an entire video about how free speech on Twitter has dramatically decreased under Musk's stewardship. Either way, it seems as if it may be a while before the plot of iRobot becomes a reality. Finally, for our tech section, we have SpaceX, another Elon Musk-headed enterprise, which made history years ago as the first company to successfully land and reuse the first stage of a rocket. Since then, SpaceX has landed nearly 100 rockets and invested heavily into reusable vehicles. One of these is the combination of the Super Heavy booster and the Starship upper stage. Both are intended to be reusable, but the Super Heavy booster is too large to land using the usual landing leg method employed on the Falcon 9. Instead, the rocket needs to be caught mid-air. Fast forward to this month, and SpaceX completed a test flight of the Super Heavy Starship combination, and succeeded in catching the Super Heavy stage using a tower with chopstick-like arms named Mechazilla. SpaceX was subsequently congratulated by companies and nations throughout the space industry. The upper stage Starship was not intended to be recovered during this test, although future launches are expected to showcase the world's first fully reusable rocket. Reusable rockets are currently the main method to make space travel cheaper, which has long been an economic goal of both SpaceX and NASA. It's hoped that these kinds of reusable rockets will drive humanity's return to the moon, the first human landing on Mars, and the eventual colonization of space. Lightning round over. We now come to God's long-abandoned pet project, the Middle East. The 1st of October saw the nation of Israel officially start its ground invasion of Lebanon. The start of the invasion comes just over a year after the infamous October 7th attack, in which Hamas fighters from Gaza stormed into southern Israel and killed 1,200 people. This would be followed by Israel's incredibly deadly campaign into Gaza, which to this day has killed an estimated 41,000 people. Following this invasion, the militant group known as Hezbollah has also declared war on Israel, stating that it won't stop until Israel pulls out of Gaza completely. Much like Hamas, Hezbollah receives its funding and equipment from Iran. Although Hezbollah is widely considered to be much more formidable, Hezbollah's military wing is said to be stronger than Lebanon's armed forces, and the group is officially the most powerful non-state military force in the world. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are very unique entities because they don't officially act as the governments of their respective countries, but are comparatively much more powerful than those who hold these official positions. We've been fortunate enough to keep in contact with Israeli tanker Corporal Daniel since the start of the October 7th attacks, a man who has seen combat in Gaza and is currently operating in southern Lebanon. When we previously asked him the difference between fighting Hamas and Hezbollah before the invasion, he would state, quote, "Hezbollah is not Hamas. They're a much more real army, for lack of a better word. They have better equipment, training, and manpower. They have tanks, state-of-the-art rockets, and drones. In short, it would be a much more conventional kind of war, as opposed to the guerrilla warfare we see in Gaza. There would be much more losses, both on the military and civilian sides." This quote would unfortunately age extremely well, as Israel's bombardment within Lebanon has marked the most intense aerial campaign outside of Gaza in over 2 decades. In the first 2 days, Israel carried out a monumental 3,000 strikes within the country, which US and Israeli officials claim has taken out over half of Hezbollah's arsenal of weapons and equipment. For reference, the United States would average around 3,000 strikes per year during its invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, which highlights just how intense conflict within Lebanon has become. Much like within Gaza, specific incidents have often become difficult to verify. Hezbollah claims to have destroyed several Israeli tanks near the Lebanese border, but when we tried to dig into this incident, we came up short. We ended up running into a string of sites referencing each other, until it all led back to an organization called Press TV, a news network which was owned by the Iranian government. So the original source that claimed that the Israeli tanks were destroyed is owned by the government who armed, trained, and funded the group who supposedly did it. This is why these stories are always named shit like "Sir Swag has a nervous breakdown" in our workflow tracker. On the topic, however, UN forces within Lebanon have become understandably upset this month, with numerous reports of coming under attack by the Israeli military. The 10th of October saw Israeli forces open fire at 3 UNIFIL positions within southern Lebanon, including its main base in Nakora. The following day, a watchtower at another UNIFIL base was hit by an Israeli tank round, injuring 2 Indonesian peacekeepers. United Nations peacekeepers have operated within the area since 1978 after Israel's first invasion of Lebanon, and have remained through Israel's second invasion of 1982, another occupation in 2000, and the Israel-Hezbollah War of 2006. Now, on what seems to be Israel's third invasion of Lebanon, Israel has claimed that the UNIFIL force has failed to do its job. This is because, as part of the peace terms that ended the 2006 war, it was agreed that the UN would prevent Hezbollah from establishing itself within the south of Lebanon. This is where the two sides start to clash. In the eyes of the UN, Israel has directly fired upon its mediators, injured its soldiers, and not so politely asked their troops to leave the area. In the eyes of Israel, UN troops have been ineffective peacekeepers who are standing in the way of Israel doing the job that the UN should have been doing in the first place. While the current death tolls on either side are still pretty foggy, and if we're being honest, changing pretty rapidly, what we do know is that over 1.2 million Lebanese citizens have been displaced by the war, and another 400,000 have crossed the border into Syria. This is fucking crazy in of itself, because Syria is basically just proxy war the country. It's perhaps not surprising, however, as despite Israel's campaign appearing very effective at systematically dismantling Hezbollah, Lebanese citizens are suffering a heavy toll for the invasion. One such incident was the bombing of the Lebanese village of Yee-Haw, a strike that reportedly killed over 20 civilians. Other attacks include a strike in southern Lebanon which reportedly killed 10 firefighters, and another in the city of Nabatea, which killed the local mayor. Anecdotally referring to his experience within Lebanon, we once again refer to Corporal Daniel, who told us, quote, "Most of the South has been completely evacuated. We very rarely encounter civilians or non-combatants. That's a huge worry of our mind, overall. A very different experience to Gaza." When we asked him how long he expects the war to last in Lebanon, he would reply, quote, "No idea, honestly. It really mostly depends on how long they give us. Right now, we're at the whims of the government and also the US. It's not completely off the table that even tomorrow morning they'll send us home. But let's go with the most realistic estimate. I'd say half a year at the very least." Following civilians being killed and mayors being blown up, if viewers are wondering whether Israel actually managed to shoot any bad guys this month, the answer is a very big yes. On a routine patrol on the 16th of this month, soldiers from Israel's 828th Bismarck Brigade came upon 3 Hamas fighters in Tal al-Sultan, an area in the far west of Gaza. During what is described as a fairly unremarkable firefight, the 3 Hamas militants were killed. It wasn't until the next day, when soldiers came back to the area, they noticed that one of the bodies shared a striking resemblance to Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. After a rush order DNA test, Israel would confirm that they had in fact killed Sinwar, which is an absolutely bonkers stroke of luck for the Israeli military. To properly put it into perspective how insane this is, this would be like some random 19-year-old grunt from Alabama accidentally killing Osama bin Laden. Before this month, Yahya Sinwar was at the very top of Israel's very long shit list, and was considered a murderous architect of terror to the Israeli people. Sinwar was not only the head of Hamas, but he's also often credited as the mastermind of the October 7th attack which kicked off this most recent conflict in the first place. Just imagine if Hitler really didn't like Jewish people, and you'd be on the right track. To make things even funnier, Corporal Daniel would point out that the tank crew that got him was actually still in training, and that the tank used was actually a variant reserved for these newer inexperienced crews. Hitler too was basically accidentally killed by a bunch of interns on training wheels. The United States hopes that the killing of Sinwar will result in a change of leadership which is much more open to diplomatic pathways. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would state that any members of Hamas who bring forward hostages who still remain within Gaza would be pardoned. It is unclear how many hostages still remain alive. Only days before Sinwar's demise, the United States warned Israel that it would need to improve humanitarian conditions within Gaza or risk being cut off from receiving military aid. With potentially new leadership in sight, however, the United States hopes that Arab nations will be able to take over security within Gaza and work with the Palestinian Authority to re-establish a sense of stability. Whether this very ambitious goal can actually be achieved remains to be seen, but still acts as a shred of optimism in an otherwise miserable conflict. We could obviously talk for much longer about this conflict, as we haven't even touched on incidents like the drone attack on Benjamin Netanyahu's house, Israel's supposedly leaked plans to invade Iran, or the thousands more dead or wounded that we'd never have time to cover. Quite unfortunately, this is a conflict that we expect will be covering long into the foreseeable future. The news might be over, but that doesn't mean the fun has to stop. Our second channel, Sir Swag Academy, is putting out a new video every week, and they're only getting better. In our latest episode, Swag himself made a presentation about his job before YouTube, so viewers who want to see his villain origin story are free to check that out down below. It's also a good time to mention that talking about war, death, and destruction is a pretty good way to get demonetized on YouTube, which is why we're once again super thankful for our incredible Patreon supporters. Supporters allow us to deliver the news month after month without a break, cover expenses and wages, and gives us the opportunity to tackle really big projects over long periods of time. We currently have around 2 hours worth of videos in various stages of production, so we're very excited to start sharing those when they're ready. A link to support us and get your name in the end credits will be down below. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'd like to wish everyone a very happy November.